Hi there. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Heather Cadenhead. I'm a wife, mother, writer, and autism advocate. I became an autism advocate when the older of my two sons was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. While some autistic children have the ability to speak, my son is non-speaking. He is now a teenager. Over on Substack, I share personal essays about our family's experience moving through a world that does not understand a boy we love. Today, I want to talk to you and dream with you about furthering accessibility in creative mediums like literature, music, and visual arts. I want to talk to you about creating spaces that make the arts and the gospel more accessible for people with disabilities. I want to talk to you about crafting simple and practical accommodations for this population. Most of all, I want to affirm the inherent value that this population brings to any environment. People with disabilities are image bearers of God, expressing the character of God in unique and specific ways. Like any other image bearer, these children and adults, as the psalmist writes, are fearfully and wonderfully made. An environment absent of people with disabilities is an environment that is absent of these specific expressions of the character of God. Before we get started, I'd like to offer a quick note about terminology. Disability terminology is sometimes confusing. Particularly where autism is concerned, there exist ongoing discussions about the use of person-first or identity-first language. For those who aren't familiar with either of those terms, autistic person is an example of identity-first language. Person with autism, on the other hand, is an example of person-first language. It is this presenter's opinion that some of this discussion is important and that some of this discussion wastes a great deal of time that might be spent on pursuits such as actually building accessible spaces and actually developing accommodations for this population. I will be alternating between person-first and identity-first language throughout this talk. When my son was a toddler, his favorite picture book was Llama Llama Red Pajama by Anna Dewdney. For a while, we read this book together almost every night. He giggled in all the right places until one night he stopped giggling. All at once, he was unable to sit for the length of a picture book. Now, he seemed distressed as I pointed to colorful pictures. He clamped his dimpled hands over his eyes and moaned, pushing Daddy and Mommy away each time we tried to read to him, or even get near him. There were long hours of crying that nothing and no one could soothe. I tried to comfort him, but he wouldn't even allow me, his mother, to touch him. This was our family's introduction to my son's experience as a non-speaking autistic person. Auditory processing differences, visual processing differences, and a nervous system so sensitive that even a whisper might register as a scream inside the walls of his brain. For a long time, I hoped that things would get better, that things would become easier for my son. At times, he seemed so distressed that it appeared he was actively fighting a pain I couldn't see. For nearly 14 years now, I've fought to help my son integrate into a world his brain and body find hostile and unwelcoming. Our family tends to exist in cycles, trying for a season to integrate into the broader community, then withdrawing, nurturing a secret, beautiful life that only 4 people will ever know about, because we have no other choice. I decided to write this talk and share this talk for all the people who've asked the question, what can we do? How can we help? I usually don't bother answering that question because I know the answer requires more than most people are willing or able to give. But I'm not going to be around forever. This candlelit cave we've built, while beautiful, won't last forever. I need to share all that I can share now, while I still have the opportunity. For as long as I have breath in my lungs, it is my privilege to advocate for my son. Today, I want to share with you simple and practical ways to increase accessibility in arts-related spaces and even ministry-related spaces. Along the way, we'll be using one of my favorite books as a roadmap, L. Frank Baum's classic, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Baum's timeless story centers on a girl named Dorothy and her journey through the magical land of Oz. After a tornado hits her home in the Kansas prairie, Dorothy is transported to a land of good witches, bad witches, sentient scarecrows, and other fantastical beings. In this talk, we'll examine Dorothy's ragtag trio of road trip pals, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion, and determine what we can learn from these characters and their support needs as we craft accessible art and build accessible spaces. If you're an artist or educator who wants to make the arts more accessible for people with disabilities, then this talk is for you. If you work in a ministry-related role and you want to make the gospel more accessible for people with disabilities, then this talk is for you. Finally, if you're a person with a disability or the parent of a child with a disability who is seeking language to communicate your right or your child's right to enjoy art or access the gospel, then this talk is for you. Let's get started with the first fantastical being Dorothy meets on the yellow brick road, the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow is played to perfection by dancer Ray Bolger in the 1939 film adaptation. The film adds a conversation that isn't present in the book. The conversation between Bolger's Scarecrow and Judy Garland's Dorothy has taken on new meaning for me as the mother of a child who can't speak. Maybe you remember the scene. Dorothy asks Scarecrow how he can talk if he hasn't got a brain. "I don't know," Scarecrow admits, "but some people without brains do an awful lot of talking, don't they?" "Yes," Dorothy acknowledges. "I guess you're right." In the book, the Scarecrow describes being set up on a tall stick and watching the farmer walk away. "I did not like to be deserted this way," Scarecrow confesses, "so I tried to walk after him, but my feet would not touch the ground and I was forced to stay on that pole. It was a lonely life to lead." In time, a crow lands on Scarecrow's shoulder. "I wonder if that farmer thought to fool me in this clumsy manner," the crow says, then hops down and eats all the corn he wants. "I felt sad at this," Scarecrow laments, "for it showed I was not such a good scarecrow after all. But the old crow comforted me, saying, 'If only you had brains in your head, you would be as good a man as any of them.' It is then that the Scarecrow decides he must try hard to get some brains." Not long after, Dorothy comes along and frees Scarecrow from his pole. Ironically, the thing that Scarecrow purports to desire more than anything, a brain, is something he already has. It's clear, particularly in the 1939 film adaptation starring Judy Garland, that the Scarecrow is quite resourceful. Near the end of the film, it is Scarecrow who hatches a plan to rescue Dorothy from the Wicked Witch's castle. It is not a brain that Scarecrow needs, as throughout the story he demonstrates a good deal of cleverness. What he needs is support. A friend to help him off the pole, and friends to walk beside him. Dorothy provides that. The Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion provide that. Friendship and community provide that. How can we, as artists, ministers, educators, parents, and friends, provide Scarecrow-style supports to individuals with disabilities? For the purpose of this talk, I'm defining a Scarecrow-style support as a resource that provides brain support. That is, receptive language support, expressive language support, auditory processing support, and related assistance. Here are some practical ideas. Bear in mind that what works for our household may not work for your household, your church, or your organization. Still, we need a starting point. In that spirit, I'm sharing ideas for Scarecrow-style supports across literature, music, and visual arts. Where literature is concerned, one of the most successful things I've done as a homeschool teacher is to utilize audiobooks. It can get tiring to read books out loud for hours on end. As a parent and teacher, academic input is very important to me. It's my belief that someone's academic output and ability to fill out worksheets or even answer comprehension questions should not limit their right to academic input, their right to access age-appropriate literature. That's where audiobooks come in. When I first introduced audiobooks into our family's homeschool, I noticed that my son often became overstimulated. The words were coming too fast. The narrator's voice at times was too pitchy. Over time, I found settings in apps like Audible and Libby that allowed me to slow down the narration speed. If the default setting is 1.0, I often slow down the narration speed to 0.75 or even 0.5. For people with auditory processing differences, a slower talking speed is often helpful. That should never mean talking down to a person or limiting the topics you discuss around a person. It simply means putting adaptations in place. Because some autistic people, in particular, think in literal terms, slowing down an audiobook provides time to process and interpret metaphors and similes that might hit a snag coming into the brain. I like to pair audiobooks with tactile activities too, to aid focus. Research shows that supports of this nature enhance concentration by grounding the body. When your body is engaged in a simple but meaningful task, your brain isn't trying to figure out what to do with your other body parts. It frees up mental energy for concentrating on an audiobook, read aloud, or even a conversation. It's key that the activity is low stress. If holding utensils is challenging for you and your child, it may not be a good idea to combine snack time with audiobook listening. I like setting out Play-Doh, kinetic sand, or homemade sensory bins for my kids when they listen to audiobooks or read alouds. In a pinch, I've even filled a cake pan with water to engage my son's body while supporting his brain with literature. A few specific and personal recommendations from my home to yours would include Cherry Jones' narration of Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House series, Jim Dale's narration of veterinarian James Herriot's stories, and Andy Serkis's narration of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series. Next, I want to discuss scarecrow-style supports where music is concerned. If you're a musician who wants to write lyrics that are accessible to people with disabilities, don't you dare strip your songs of metaphor. Make liberal use of metaphor, but explain your metaphors whenever you can. Psalm 42:3 is a great example. The psalmist writes, "My tears have been my food day and night." In some cases, a person with a developmental disability may take a verse like that quite literally. But the psalmist goes on in the same chapter to explain what he means by that. "My soul is cast down within me. Why do I go mourning because of the oppression of the enemy?" By the end of the chapter, the reader is very clear on what the psalmist means when he says that his tears have been his food day and night. And yet, it's poetry. It's poetry that is accessible. Finally, I want to discuss scarecrow-style supports for the visual arts. If you're an illustrator, graphic novelist, or animator, consider using high-contrast colors. People with low vision, certain neurological conditions, or color blindness may find high-contrast images easier to process, which then improves overall comprehension. Bold black and white patterns often reduce sensory overload and increase focus for some people with disabilities, though of course it isn't universally true of every person with a disability. My son's visual therapist actually recommended that we watch classic black and white television programs instead of modern programs, because these programs are already black and white. The dialogue and pacing is often clearer and easier to process. We find no dizzying kaleidoscope of TikTok jump cuts in these programs. And it's easy to stream many of these classics for free, or if you prefer physical media, black and white classics are easy to find at your local library. My husband, who publishes a Substack comic called Fallout Trail, also suggests reinforcing dialogue with visuals. For example, if a character says, "I'm mad," It's helpful to show the characters gritted teeth or shaking fists to support reading comprehension. My husband's comic, by the way, features an autistic main character, and if this talk is of interest to you, it's likely that his comic might just tickle your fancy as well. Now, you probably remember that the Tin Man is the next character Dorothy meets on the Yellow Brick Road, but for now, we're going to jump ahead to the Cowardly Lion. Don't worry, we'll come back to the Tin Man in just a bit. We won't forget about him. Roughly halfway through the book, just after the lion has joined our company of misfits, Dorothy and her companions come to a great chasm that reaches as far as they can see on either side. They realize that the sides of the chasm are simply too steep to climb down, and Baum writes that for a moment it seemed that their journey must end. Suddenly the lion steps in. He bravely offers to jump over the chasm with each new friend on his back, one at a time. The ragtag troupe makes it across the chasm safely, but soon after they come to another gulf across the road. This one, however, is so broad and so deep that the lion knows he cannot cross it. The scarecrow, still supposedly absent of a brain, observes a great tree near the ditch. He suggests that the Tin Man chop it down so it falls to the other side, and Dorothy and company may walk across the fallen tree with ease. Like Scarecrow, the thing that the lion purports to desire more than anything, courage, is something he already has. What he needs is support, a friend to put a name to his fears, and friends to walk beside him. Dorothy, Scarecrow, and Tin Man provide that. Friendship and community provide that. For the purpose of this talk, I'm defining a lion-style support as a resource that reduces anxiety and regulates the nervous system. That includes sensory break spaces, sensory regulation tools, and related assistance. Here are some practical ideas for lion-style supports across literature, music, and visual arts. When a person has fine or gross motor differences, it might be challenging for that person to access art that involves the use of motor skills. For example, some special education classrooms might only provide access to board books, even for teenage and adult students, because turning the pages of other kinds of books may be challenging for students with motor differences. One quick, easy way to build access to a greater number of books for students with disabilities is to reinforce thin pages with clear tape for easier turning. I like to use clear shipping tape because it's strong and durable. Though my son, to my knowledge, can't read on his own, reinforced pages provide access to books outside of just board books. This adaptation gives my son access to picture books, visual encyclopedias, cookbooks, and much more. Reinforced pages reduce anxiety for my son as he engages with books. That support helps him to persevere in the task of viewing pages rather than abandon the task when frustration sets in. I recommend heading up a used bookstore, locating high-interest books for your child, and then taking those books home to reinforce pages. It's a low-cost way to make a large number of titles immediately accessible to your child or for educators, your classroom. Where music is concerned, I want to talk about lion-style supports at live concerts and performances. If you're an artist who wants to provide an easy lion-style support for your fans, my top tip is to keep chatter to a minimum. My non-speaking son is a huge music fan. He's attended a number of concerts. As such, we've noticed patterns in what works for him and what doesn't. Transitions are very difficult for some autistic people. My son becomes distressed when there are too many breaks in a set, too many meandering stories, too many stage mishaps played for comic effect. In general, too many interruptions to the thing he came for, the music. If you're performing live or helping to plan a live performance, consider the number of transitions you're asking your audience to process. For a person with a developmental disability, it can be quite jarring to transition from a highly preferred activity, like a favorite song, to a long and meandering talk. That doesn't mean you can't thank other musicians on stage. That doesn't mean you can never tell a story. That said, my suggestion is to script your stories. Memorize them or get a teleprompter. Keep the meandering, chatty portions of your concerts to a minimum. Give fans with neurological differences as much of your music as possible. Pragmatically, making noise-reducing headphones available for fans is also helpful. My family never goes anywhere without a pair of noise-reducing headphones, but for those families that may just be learning that a loved one has anxiety or auditory sensitivity, it may not be a support item they carry around consistently. It may not be a support item they've even considered. So again, if you're someone who wants to make art, in this case music, accessible to a greater number of people, noise-reducing headphones are another helpful support. Where visual arts are concerned, I want to talk about sensory break spaces. Happily, these kinds of spaces are increasingly available at churches, museums, parks, and other public environments. Knowing that a nearby amusement park offered a sensory break space as well as reservation-based ride access, allowing our family to skip the crowded lines that create so much anxiety for our son, gave us the confidence to try a family vacation last summer. These resources quite literally allowed us to participate in experiences that had previously been out of reach. This not only benefited my autistic son, it benefited my typically developing son, who often misses out on opportunities because they aren't accessible to his older brother. It benefited my husband, and me too. We were able to enjoy an experience that felt like a typical family milestone, which gave us a needed jolt of hope for the future. While I'm thrilled that large churches, theme parks, and similar environments offer sensory break spaces, we need more of them. Making room in the inn for people with disabilities is one way to do that. I'm including sensory break spaces under the umbrella of visual arts because I believe that our artistic and creative gifts can be used to great effect in these spaces. Make a sensory space that is beautiful. It should be a space that reduces anxiety, of course, but it should also be a space that anyone would want to spend time in. If you're an artist, paint a calming mural for such a space. If you're a designer, find soft lighting to illuminate the room. Don't just grab a cast-off sofa that nobody else wants. Imagine this space as a gift to the people who need it most. Make it comfortable. Make it beautiful. Pour fragrant oil over the feet of Jesus. Be creative and extravagant with your support. Delight in the privilege of giving the gift of beauty to a population that has grown accustomed to being forgotten. I promised we'd come back to the Tin Man, didn't I? I wanted to save this section for last because this section deals with matters of the heart, our hearts. 1 Corinthians 13, 1-2 says, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but have not love, I am nothing." You can tick every box on the Scarecrow style support list and every box on the Lion style support list and still fail people with disabilities if you're not providing resources with love. On more than one occasion, I've encountered people who were incredibly proud of their offerings for children and adults with disabilities. Our family excitedly looked for that space, that resource, that option, only to find it situated far away from everyone else. In some cases, we walked through dark hallways to get to these designated locations. Bathrooms were closed, lights turned off to save electricity. It doesn't exactly make us feel welcome. We've occasionally walked into spaces that were jarringly inappropriate for children with autism, in our case. There were bright fluorescent lights and coloring sheets with broken crayons, Gideon Bibles and cast-off rocking chairs. Very quickly, it becomes clear that no thought has been put into this space. It is clear that no families of children with disabilities were consulted in the creation of this space. As we listen to the echoed noises of faraway corridors, it feels a little like being locked inside a prison cell. Occasionally, people ask what they can do to make these kinds of spaces better. I rarely tell anybody my actual opinion, because my actual opinion is that I'd bulldoze everything in there. If I were in charge of a sensory space, I'd make a coffee shop meets the Shire meets Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood kind of space. I'd make a space where kids and parents felt comfortable and safe. That's what I've done in my home with what resources I have available to me. I understand that resources aren't limitless. Volunteers come and go. Donations dwindle. This isn't about spending money. This is about being thoughtful and intentional with the resources you have as an arts venue, ministry, homeschool tutorial, and the list goes on. Let's not ask, what's the least we can do? Let's ask, what's the most we can do with our existing resources? If you only have donated furniture and a classroom with fluorescent lights, that's fine. But clean and polish the furniture. Take pride in the space. Cover up those fluorescent rectangles with billowy light covers. Start an online wish list with items that might benefit families who use your space. Then, invite others, your congregation, listeners, readers, friends, to invest in that space and those families. In both the book and the 1939 film, the Tin Man of Oz is convinced he doesn't have a heart. What he cannot see in himself, however, his friends see quite plainly. In the book, the Tin Man accidentally steps on a beetle crawling along the road. Baum writes, "This made the Tin Man very unhappy, for he was always careful not to hurt any living creature, and as he walked along he wept tears of sorrow and regret." Providing Tin Man-style support is about treasuring people with disabilities, recognizing that they are whole and complete human beings. It's about caring for their hearts, as well as their brains and nervous systems. According to the CDC, roughly 1 in 31 children in the United States is diagnosed with autism. And the Pew Research Center reports that the average American has about 634 social ties across all acquaintances. That means that today, the average American is exposed to roughly 20 unique and distinct autistic people across his or her social circles. These are 20 image bearers of God across your family, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. These children and adults need the gospel. They need beauty. They need music. They need stories. They need art. And they need love. The 14th chapter of Luke tells us, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just." Thank you for traveling the yellow brick road with me today, and for taking a few moments to imagine literature, music, and art that is accessible to all image bearers.